Welcome to the Storypowers podcast, the show about the power of stories, the people who tell them, and why you should be doing it too. I'm your host, keynote speaker and storytelling coach, Francisco Mahfuz. My guest today is Conor Neill. Conor is a sought-after keynote speaker on leadership. He teaches leadership communications at IESE Business School and is the President of Vistage in Spain, which is part of the world's leading CEO organization. His YouTube channel on leadership and influence has over 230,000 subscribers and more than 21 million views. All of his accomplishments are even more impressive when you realize that one of Conor's daughters is only 4 years old, and so, just like me, he's struggling under the frozen dictatorship of Queen Elsa. Ladies and gentlemen, Conor Neill. Conor, welcome to the show.
Yeah, it could be that during the time we're talking, we hear the songs of Frozen coming from just outside my home office. But I think, one of the things in thinking about story, where I learned more than anywhere else, the need and the ability to tell a good story was in bedtime stories with my elder daughter. And my elder daughter is now 13. But when she was 4 and 5 and 6, we would often go, and at nighttime I would read her a story from a book, and then I would tell her a story that I would somewhat invent as I went. When she was 4, and I would start to tell my story, she said, "Daddy, I want a real story." And I would say, "What's a real story?" And she said, "From a book." When she was 6 or 7, it was 50-50. By the time she was 8, she didn't want book stories. She wanted Conor stories. And Conor stories to a kid, what you realize is kids love fantastical things happening. Kids love the same story being retold over and over and over again because they get something different out of the story each time. And I think the way I tell stories in front of a group of 50, 60, 70-year-old senior leaders, I have developed more of the ability in how I kept my 7, then 8, then 9-year-old daughter engaged in listening to a story as I was inventing it. And I think kids are wonderful because they give you direct, blunt feedback. If it's dull, if it's self-serving, if you're trying, they look at you with a look of, painful. And they let you know. So I think the greatest practice in becoming good at telling stories is telling stories to your kids. And I think, starting off, the stories that kids want to hear, what was I like 2 years ago? What was I like as a baby? What was I like? What did I do? What was my first day of school? So starting by just telling what you remember of their first day of school, their first prize, and seeing how you turn your child into the hero of a story. And to be the hero of a story, it can't just be, well, you went to school, everything was good, and you won a prize, and it was great. That's not a story. If I bring someone into IESE in a leadership class because they climbed a mountain, and I say, share your story. Oh, well, I'd always wanted to climb the mountain. We set off. The weather was nice. We reached the top. Yeah, it was great. That's not the story. And with kids, you realize it's how people overcome odds. And they say, a good story is a hero wants something so much that they're willing to overcome obstacles. An epic story is a hero wants something so much that they're willing to overcome every obstacle possible, including the loss of their own existence.
I don't know if when I started telling stories to Alice, my daughter, who is also almost 4 now, I don't know if I was perhaps slightly better than you were when you started. But I know that I shot myself in the foot because I started telling her stories at the same time that I started posting stories on social media. So I had realized that they had to be somewhere between 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes long, and I started thinking, okay, maybe I can put this story on in a few days' time, but let me test it first. And I started testing them with her, and I realized, to my great surprise, that there was pretty much no story that she wouldn't find interesting. So I had stories about, funny things that happened to me many years ago. I had the occasional story about her. I remember I had a story about one of my colleagues got locked in outside of the office, and I had to stop playing with her and go there on a Friday night. And and I threw in that he needed to go back home because his dog was going to be hungry or whatever. And that's become the David in the office story. There's nothing particularly exciting that happens, but I've now told that story hundreds of times, and I keep being asked, Daddy, do you have any new stories? And as much as I love telling stories, I don't want to tell them at the end of the day when I haven't, I just want to get a book and turn off my brain sometimes and just go through, the Cat in the Hat, or Gruffalo or whatever. When you can kind of go through the motions a little bit. I don't want to have to think about what I'm doing every time I read her in bed. So I had to at some point say, okay, listen, I'll tell you one story and 2 small books, but no more, because I was just having to come up with these things every single day.
Well, I think there's an element, that there's different reasons to tell story. And the type of story I would stand on a stage in a conference and share it with a group of business leaders has a different purpose and a different context than the type of story that I can share with my daughter at night. And very often, playing with my kids, what I realize is after a day of work, I'm used to planning and thinking ahead and thinking, how will this work? And that's a terrible approach to play. Play is, there's a possibility. And the more you think about the future, the less you're in the possibility of what could happen. Last night, myself, my daughter, my wife, we were playing with a balloon. Now, my head, as we began, and I'd just come off a Zoom call, my head was thinking, right, we need a dynamic that is this and whatever. And it took me a couple of minutes to just go with it. It's going to evolve. And the less I overthink it and just allow each of us to evolve it together, the more powerful it can be. And what I see, my elder daughter loves Minecraft. Back when she was quite young, I was worried, is this a good influence or a bad influence? And I actually spent a few days in Minecraft worlds with her. And over the summer, she and her friends would go into Minecraft worlds and they would build. And Minecraft is like unlimited Lego. Whatever you can imagine, you can do. But it's multiplayer. And what's fascinating is watching how they learn to construct things together. Because, the way I would approach is, right, we're going to build a house, going to be like this. And then everything else will be restricted down to my initial idea. And I'll be saying, no, that wasn't what we agreed. The way her and her friends construct in Minecraft is they have an initial idea, but the environment, the shape of the contours of the land, whether there's water or not, you just hear them, I have an idea. We could do this. Oh, that's good. And we can add this. Oh, and that's good. And we can do this. So play brings out this possibility that everything can be tried, everything can be offered. And it's me that comes in and says, no, that wasn't the original idea. That's not what we agreed. And I think that the same in story. A story that I would stand on a stage and tell to a group of business leaders, I know why I'm telling the story. I know how it finishes. I know what the punchline is, and I know the message. A story that I'm telling my daughter, very often I'll begin and say, so there was a girl on an adventure. Who was the girl? And she said, Ali. Okay. And Ali was with 3 friends. Who are they? Oh, Saul. And Ali had some animals. A horse. Okay. And they were going somewhere. Where were they going? And she will offer up all those bits that I find hard, which is the thinking. And then, what I learned is strange noises happen and they don't know what that noise is. And there was a noise and the animals are scared. And Ali looks at her friends and they're scared. What was the noise? And they listen and they listen and they hear the noise again. It came from over there. So it's not really going anywhere, but I'm letting her create it. And because she wants to put herself in the middle of it and see how my version of her would react to these different things. And there's things that happen where she's scared. There's things that happen where one of the animals gets stuck and needs to be rescued. There's angry people coming and threatening them, and how do they respond? So, and often, I do have a convoluted way. If I know that she's struggling with something in school, and not a subject, but the dynamic between her and her friends, where someone's been left out or someone's angry at someone. I know I have this ability that in the story, it so happens that one of the friends doesn't agree with the plan and goes off in a huff. And the group needs to figure out what to do with one of them who's in a huff and refuses to play, but they need her because they're not able to get to the next stage without this person. So in a story to business leaders, I'm not inventing it up as I go along. A story to my daughter, I guess it's allowing her to be at the center of a story that I'm telling, where I'm making that avatar of her as resourceful in front of challenges as I can possibly imagine that I could be. And I guess deep down, what I'm trying to convey to her in a manipulative way, perhaps.
I would call it stealth parenting.
Stealth parent, yeah. And a story is you don't have to create a situation in the world. You don't need to bring in actors and put my daughter in the middle of it for her to practice playing out something. In a story, once you tell a story and you put a bit of a scene, people invest themselves into the story. And when they identify themselves with the character in the story and the goal that this character has is similar to some of their own goals, they're very invested in the story. And the stories that I would tell with my daughters are very much, as a kid, I loved the Dungeons and Dragons books where it would be, you're in front of a door. To turn left, turn to number 233. To turn right, turn to 288.
Pick your own adventure, I think they call it.
Yeah, so you make your own adventure. And so you were reading a story, but you made decisions. And that's the type of story that I would tell to my daughter. And at the end, we end because it's so late that it's time to go to sleep. There isn't really an ending. Whereas if I'm giving a speech to an adult, you get sort of 90 seconds before they go, right, what's the point? Where are you going with this? And perhaps, that idea that as adults, we learn to switch off play and possibility and exploration mode. And we live in a world where everything is technology. And technology is that there's a purpose. So what's the purpose of life? What's the purpose of a microphone? What's the purpose of everything? And we live at a time where if my life doesn't have a purpose, my being is meaningless. And that's only in the last 30 years. You go back 1,000 years ago and everything was God's creation. So, what's my purpose? Being. God created me. I don't need to do anything to be a worthy member of existence. But the last 30 years, we've got so heavy into everything's value is the return it creates, what it's for. And I think deep down, a human being isn't for something. We exist. We have the ability to be conscious and to explore and to allow possibility. And the stories I tell to grown-ups have a moral. The story I tell to my children is an exploration.
It sounds that it's a cross between storytelling and improv, what you're doing there. Which, again, I can see how that would trigger very different responses in a child than the more strategically chosen story that might impart a lesson. You let me pull on some of the threads that you brought up there. So one of the things is you talked about endings. There's no clear ending to the story. So, but I want to talk about starts. And I was doing the research that I normally do before I interview anyone or talk to anyone, and I had this feeling, but I wanted to check, and I think I've confirmed it. But are you the world's foremost authority in how to start a speech?
I wouldn't call the world's foremost authority. I think
the YouTube world,
in the YouTube world, and it's important not to confuse popularity with correctness.
Sure.
You can be very wrong and have millions of people in agreement with you. And you can be very right and no one agrees with you. I'm part of a business school, the IESE, which is part of the academic tradition. And, when you publish something, you stand up in front of your peers and they attack you and they test it and they break it down. And it's a wonderful way to realize how little you know. YouTube is a very dangerous thing because you don't have to be an expert to put out an idea that resonates with people. And, the danger of social media and YouTube is the fake news. And often the person who's calling it fake news is the greatest purveyor of fake news. But I love, there's a statement from Jim Rohn. And, for me, the way I speak, which is full of stories, is completely modeled after the way Jim Rohn used to give his talks. And there's never a straight answer. Nothing's ever made simple. There's always story after story after story. And I love the way he used his voice, the pace of his delivery, the meaning that he put into these simple stories. And today, 20, 30 years later, after hearing those stories on headphones while heading on the bus to my first jobs, I can still remember the story. And when I tell myself the story, I remember what the point was. And so many of his stories are just about being resourceful in the face of challenge. But, how to start a story, I guess a story is somebody wants something and is willing to pay a price to get it. So in the beginning, you've got to have somebody who wants something. The more that somebody resonates with the people you're speaking to. So if I'm telling a story to my 13-year-old daughter and the central character is an 85-year-old man, I'm going to have to work hard to make it resonate with her. And it's not impossible because there are things that are common to every human being. There are questions we have about how to build friendships. What's the right relationship with your father, with your mother, with your grandfather, with your grandmother? Jung had a set of archetypes, and every one of us has a built-in hunger to get clarity on those archetypal roles in our life. How should my father be? What's the right type of father-son relationship? So if I tell a story about a 13-year-old girl, I don't need to work so hard to connect it. If I tell a story about an 85-year-old man or an alien monster, I need to make sure that she can see that this alien monster has some yearnings or desires that connect with what she'd like to achieve. So, at the beginning of a story, you need to get the listener invested in that the central character is yearning for something that they too have an interest in discovering in their own life. And the moment that there's some connection there, then you need obstacles, and little obstacles produce little stories. No one tells a story of, Conor Neill a couple of weeks ago climbed Tibidabo mountain behind Barcelona. That's not a story because, it's not, it is an obstacle, but it's only an obstacle in that it takes you an hour to get up there. It's not an obstacle in that it pushes you to explore your resources, your capacities, pull on other people to help you, speak to people who've done it before. But, if someone's going to climb Everest, that's a story, because you don't decide to climb Everest now and then a week later on a budget holiday, make the peak on the third day. To climb Everest is a 10-year plan. And, when someone comes and talks about how they climbed Everest, they don't come into the room and hold up a piece of rock and say, I climbed Everest and I just want to pass around a piece of rock from the top of Everest so everyone can touch it. We're actually not that interested in what Everest was like. We're interested, what's the difference between the person in front of us who has overcome this obstacle and the person you used to be? And that's what we're interested in. Not the climbing of Everest, but the change in the person in front of us. For me, Jim Rohn, I love, it's just simple stories. Some of them from the Bible, some of them just from farming, some of them from his dad. None of them are complex. None of them are overdone, but he's got a story to cover every value and every approach and every obstacle you can face in your life that anyone can understand, whether they're 6 years old or 60 years old. I think the two figures that I most used as models for how I want to speak, one was Jim Rohn and another was Alan Watts. And Jim Rohn keeps simple things simple. Alan Watts tells incredibly complex, difficult to comprehend things, but makes it just feel like you're getting it while you listen. And, Jim Rohn, I could listen to Jim Rohn for an hour and I could probably tell all the stories I've heard. Alan Watts, I could listen to him for an hour. I feel like I've learned a lot, but I couldn't actually explain anything that I've heard. But it's the way he speaks. It's got nothing to do with the content. It's all in to do how his voice sounds, how he pushes you to think and explore something. And what he's getting you to explore are things that are very difficult to put into words.
I've heard Alan Watts enough, but I think that the answer Perhaps the answer to what you just described is that because Jim Rohn talks in stories, Alan Watts doesn't. And not only he doesn't, but he's tackling very complex concepts that even if you study them a lot, they're very elusive. It's difficult to get your hands around what exactly he's trying to say. And I realize now that for someone who's not familiar with your work, my question before about you being the world's foremost authority is hanging in the air without any context. I was very familiar with that video you have on YouTube, which is called How to Start a Speech. And that now is up to, I think, 14 million views. The second most viewed video when you search for how to start a speech has about 5 million views. So hence the world's foremost authority on how to start a speech. And since I touched on that subject, I think it's worth mentioning very briefly that one of the ways was a question, particularly a question that is interesting to the audience. The second way was of the strange fact. And I think you talked about fake news. One of the first comments on yours is someone attacking you for propagating the urban myth that, that there's more people alive today than have ever died. So someone very upset about that. And the third is the story. And I want to talk about the story in a second, but as I was going through the most popular comments, there was, someone saying that it was great, someone saying, well, I haven't learned anything from this, someone saying this is an urban myth, and then someone said, the way I start every speech is I rip out an explosive fart. That always gets an audience's attention. I don't think we should be recommending that approach.
Well, I guess the key is what your interest is. If your interest is getting attention, there's good attention and bad attention. In general, I'd say there's 4 types of audience you speak to: friendly, enemy, apathetic, and uneducated. Friendly audience, they already love you. They already know who you are. They want you to succeed. And your objective is to create community. So share a story that we now know together, but no one else knows that story as well as we know. So, for me, one of the stories that I tell, I have a mug here with a buffalo on it. And almost every program that I teach, I tell a story about buffalo. To anyone who's been part of my program, buffalo doesn't just mean an animal that lives on the plains in the United States. Buffalo is representative of an approach to dealing with the problems in life. And at the beginning of a course, I asked, I need a volunteer. By midway, I say, who's a buffalo? And people put their hands up because it's an approach to seizing the risk, taking opportunity of the challenges, going towards the storm, the pain, the difficulty. And the story captures this idea that a hero goes towards pain, not all pain, but sometimes on the path to your destination, pain is guaranteed. The heroic response is go straight into it, go straight to the most painful thing and deal with it now. And if you deal with life that way, it is a heroic life. So the figure of the buffalo takes on a symbol within the community, but outside, no one knows what buffalo is. So symbols that resonate within a community, and to me, that's one power of a story. Within a company, how to create symbols that everyone outside doesn't know what the hell you're talking about, but everyone inside absolutely knows the meaning of that symbol. And for me, on my programs, the buffalo is a very powerful symbol of a heroic approach to dealing with the challenges of life. The cow is the person who tries to avoid pain. And I think there's this very many sayings that you can have anything you want in life if you're willing to pay the price. The problem is too many people think that you can get what you want without paying the full price. And if you do, the price will come due in other ways. If you become rich because you win the lottery, the price will be paid in other ways. There are very few people who win the lottery and had no practice in having a lot of resources that 2-3 years later have been effective in looking after that massive influx of resources. So a friendly audience, you want to tell something that unites us even more as a group. A hostile audience, and perhaps, how to start a speech, it depends on who you're speaking to. To a hostile audience, you're not going to get them to change their mind at the beginning. In a way, the greatest thing that you can achieve with a hostile audience is just that they stop and question some of their assumptions. They don't change their mind. They don't think that you're the answer, but they just stop and they have some questions now to investigate their core beliefs and to investigate the ideas that are being pushed to their community. To an apathetic audience, and this I would picture as if my daughter's school asked me to come in and speak to the 13 and 14-year-olds about choosing your career. I can't imagine a more apathetic audience than if I picture myself at 13 or 14 years old in school and I'm told, next half hour, Francisco Mahfuz is going to come in and talk to you about choosing your career. I would think like, who the hell is this guy? What on earth does he have to offer to me and the challenges I face? And, to an apathetic audience, a story can be a very powerful way of beginning, because you can tell a story where they start to see themselves in the center of the story and start to realize that you do get what it is like to be them right now. So the way I would begin a speech to a group of 13 or 14-year-olds is telling them what my life was like when I was exactly in their place, what I would have been thinking in a class like this, what I would see if I was looking at a person in a suit standing up in front of them preaching. And the more that resonates with their own experience, the more they think, well, maybe this guy does get what my life does feel like, the challenges that I'm facing. Maybe there is something to connect here. And, the uneducated audience, in a way, you can't convince them of anything because they don't have the basis by which to do the thinking. And there often a story is very powerful, because a story, we as human beings just get story. It's the way we share wisdom. It's the way, if you go back 100,000 years, we didn't have books, we didn't have YouTube, we didn't have podcasts. The way knowledge was shared within a community was older people or wiser people or the warriors telling stories of how they'd done the hunt, of how they'd found the food, of how they overcame the great cold a few years ago.
And who's not pulling their weight, and who is sleeping around. Gossip, surely one of the oldest forms of story. Yeah.
Yep, the free rider problem. So, and I guess we as humans, one of the ways that we've dealt with the free rider problem is by telling stories about values, telling stories about the right way to be as a member of a community. If you think, what Homer did in Odysseus and the Iliad, this is putting down the culture of what it is to be a good Greek citizen. And the story, all that happens in the story are all the ways a good Greek warrior would face the challenges of life. And what's interesting, Odysseus is a liar and a cheat to people who are not Greek. So it's perfectly all right for Odysseus to lie and to cheat, except to other Greek citizens. There, it's not okay to lie or to cheat, but to everyone else, a heroic approach is lying and cheating to get what you want. When you move to the Roman myths, the Aeneid, now it's not okay to lie or cheat to anyone. And what's interesting in looking at those stories, you think, they're just fun stories about adventures happening. No, it's someone trying to codify what it means to be a good human being. And what it meant to be a good human being for the Greeks is different than what it came to mean to be a good human being for the Romans. So the Greeks, if you weren't born Greek, there was no way of becoming Greek. Romans, you just had to say, I pledge allegiance to the emperor, and you became Roman. And what the power of the Roman Empire was this ability to tell stories that allowed everyone to become part of being Roman. I think there was a thing saying when the Roman Empire conquered France, or what is today France, within 2 generations, all the names were Roman names, because the people aspired to be part of this. They aspired to connect to the stories. They aspired to connect to the roots of Romulus and Remus and how the city was created. And I think, America, Hollywood, in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s, did more than anything to put America as this shining city on the hill, the emblem of democracy and human rights and a way of living together and innovating. I guess, the America I grew up with, 1970s, 1980s, the way the Irish looked at America was, this is, every one of us wants to go there. Everyone wants to find freedom. I think Hollywood has moved off selling the myth of America and gone on to make profitable movies. But the movies from the 50s, 60s, 70s, for me, Star Wars was, I guess, the epitome of the hero, the independent hero who's helped along the way, but essentially one single individual overcomes the great Black Empire.
It's the perfect example of, well, it's probably the very first obvious use of the hero's journey in cinema, and it was very much that. It wasn't an accident. George Lucas was a big fan of Joseph Campbell, and it's now the template for almost every single Hollywood movie, and it still works. But I want to touch on something you mentioned before and close the loop with the whole starting a speech thing, because in your video, I don't think you say this, but I heard you say this somewhere else. So the three ways was the question, the interesting factoid, and the story. Now, I've heard you say somewhere else that story should be about when you first encountered the problem or the subject that you're now going to discuss in your speech. And I love that definition, because I have used that before to explain to people this idea that you should start with the end in mind. Are you going to talk about trust? Then you need to talk about when you realized that was important, or when you screwed up and you didn't show trust, or someone didn't with you. And then you said something else that I hadn't heard before. You said, and I think this should be a story that happened when you were roughly between 5 and 15 years of age. And you just talked about America. So does your story with leadership start around that age in that school cafeteria that I heard you talk about?
Yeah, and I guess Carl Jung had a view that your earliest memory is a very, very valuable thing. It's probably not the earliest thing you remember, but it's the thing that your subconscious pops up when you think, what's my earliest memory? And for Carl Jung, the idea was, this is a powerful message from your subconscious to you about the things that you're passionate about what is meaningful to you. So, he certainly pushed people to explore back to your earliest memories. I run an exercise with thousands of people in the programs that I teach, retreats that I run. And an exercise that I will often have the group do is called a lifeline. And the lifeline is on an A4 sheet of paper. The y-axis, so up and down, is happy or sad. And the x-axis is time, from your birth through till today. And I ask people to graph the line of your life. The moments you remember being happy, plot them up above the axis. The moments where you were sad, where you were lost, where you were lonely, where you were unsupported, where nothing seemed to connect, graph them at the bottom. And I give people 10 minutes to do the first version of the line of their life. And when people show the line of their life, very often they'll say, I had a normal childhood. I've seen 35,000 people share this, and they will all start with, I had a normal childhood. And then they will go on to explain a totally not normal childhood, but that they've got categorized as, this is the childhood that everyone had. So I had a normal childhood for me. You had a normal childhood for you. But your normal childhood was very different from your brother, your sister, from almost anyone else. Even in the same family, with the same parents doing their best to be the same type of parenting to you, just the mere existence of a brother or a sister changes the dynamic in the house, changes what you can get reward for. If the first child in a home is successful in school, there's no room to be number 2 successful in school. The second child needs to find somewhere else to get a name for themselves. So very often, the exact same genes in the second child, if the first child is good at school, the second child has to be a rebel, because there's no room to get rewards for being number 2 in whatever the first child is. And in a team, 1% difference is aggravated because you can't copy someone else. You need to create something for you. But this idea of childhood, I think Viktor Frankl and then Tony Robbins has made quite popular the 6 fundamental human needs that each of us have. And at a bottom level, it's safety and variety.
Frankl or Maslow?
Well, Maslow has the hierarchy of needs,
Yeah.
but the hierarchy weren't viewed as the fun. His was that. Well, they're all connected. So Maslow has these down the bottom. Tony Robbins uses this quite a bit. I've seen it in other places. But these survival needs, safety and risk. And if you at 5 years old were worried about whether you were going to eat tonight, then your whole existence is about creating safety in your life. And even if at 55 years old, you're a multimillionaire and all your family's a multimillionaire, and even if you lost all your money, there's friends saying, "Can't you stay on my yacht, stay at my house?" You'll still have the anxiety of the 5-year-old within you. Because what you learn 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 years old are strategies for survival as a 5-year-old, but they stay with you the rest of your life. What you're anxious about at 40 is not the circumstances of 40. It's what was missing when you were 5, 6, 7 years old. And even if your parents were perfect, there's still something missing. Because what we seek as human beings, completion, to feel not alone, these things are impossible desires. In Buddhism, they would say, desire is the source of our suffering. To desire is where all of the pain begins. But we as human beings, we desire. And in a way, a story captures desire. A story is, I'm not okay where I am, but if I get somewhere else, things will be better. And those things might be my life, the whole world's life, other people's life. But we don't go on a mission to fix other people's things. We go on a mission because there's a meaning to us. And whichever of these underlying emotional needs, to whatever degree, wasn't met when you were young, that will always provide the anxiety the rest of your life. And you can listen to the voice that tries to protect you from it, or you can begin to be aware that it's not you. That voice of anxiety in you isn't you. It isn't your best self. It's a strategy of survival from 5 years old, but it's going to remain with you forever.
Would you say that, because I think that the story I heard you share before, which is what led us down this path, was, I don't know if it was leadership or if it's your interest in communication, but I believe the story was that you moved to America when you were young, right?
So one of the, and this comes a bit from my exploration of why am I driven to, why do I find this so interesting? And, if I think a real difficult moment in my life is when my father's job moved from Dublin to Chicago. And I moved from a school where I'd just known my friends all my life. I'd never made a friend in the time of my memory. I was popular. I was good at the sports that we played. Age 13, 14, girls and boys start to come together again. And there's that dynamic of who likes me. And just in that moment, our family moved from Dublin to Chicago. And no one told me it's going to be hard the first few weeks. And even if they had have told me, I think our capacity to comprehend what that might mean, that, you're leaving behind a world where everyone knows you, everyone connects to you, you walk to school and you belong to a place where you're still the same person, but no one pays any attention to you. And for me, class was bad, but you had a place to sit. The epically painful part of me in school, 14 years old, was the lunch break, when you got your tray, you put your food on it, you paid for your food, and then you turned, and there were 1,500 people all sat in wonderful groups of friends. And I would look for a small corner just to rest my tray and eat my meal by myself. And that's just at the time when everyone else is desperate to feel part of groups. So probably 7 or 8 years old, kids would be open to a new friend, open to new people, open to who you are. But 13, 14 years old, people are so desperate to belong to their own friend groups that very few are going to risk damaging their link to their friend group by speaking to some stranger. I think I never overcame. I never in America was able to recreate the world of belonging, the world of being popular, the world of just not thinking that I was a loser or anything. And after 2 years in the United States, I think my concept of myself, and this is the strange thing that happens when we are kids. When you're an adult and something doesn't work out, you tend to view that the world has the problem. When you're 5 years old and something doesn't work out, you tend to be that you are the problem. And I don't say believe or know. I say you become that you are the problem. You live that you are the problem. 14, you're still half a 5-year-old and a little bit of an adult. So I became that I wasn't popular. I became that people don't engage with me. I became that I'm a background person. And I guess the image that I had, now looking back is the soap opera Friends. There's the 6 foreground characters, but sometimes they go down to the cafe at the bottom of their building.
You were Gunther.
I was, yes. Sadly, there's even a name for it.
You become Gunther.
I was Gunther, but at least Gunther had a name. I was the unknown walk-on bit part in one series that didn't come back. But in the cafe, very often you'll see the 6 characters sat on the sofa, and there's people in the background. By 16 years old, my self-concept was there are foreground people in the world and there are background people. And it just is. And it just happens that in this lifetime, I'm a background person. Other people will be the hero of this world. And it took me probably till 25, 30 years old to kind of dawn, to let go a little bit. But I suspect, I find conflict very difficult. And there's probably a degree that friendship, because friendship was so hard to get back again, I don't do things to risk friendship now. And sometimes to get to a deeper level of friendship, you need to have conflict. You need to let someone know where something isn't okay with you. But I find that a really difficult thing to do. And I guess, if there was a version of Conor that never left Ireland, that stayed with the same group of friends, that just has the same friends and has no worries about whether I belong, whether I'm connected, where home is, maybe that version of Conor would find it much easier to have conflict with friends, knowing that they're not going to disappear. They're going to be with you. My friends disappeared every 2 years when I was 14, then 16, then 18.
Maybe that version of Conor doesn't feel the drive to become a lifelong student of persuasion, because persuasion is the conflict-free way of getting your ideas across and getting people to do the things you want to do. But you perhaps wouldn't have needed that because you'd have felt solid on the ground you were walking. And I think that brings me to something else I've heard you say, and I thought it was an incredible definition. I had never heard anything like it. So I think you were talking about what it means to be an entrepreneur, and I think your definition was, if you have more ideas than resources, then you're an entrepreneur, and the only way to bridge that gap is with words.
Yeah, I firmly believe that entrepreneur is not that you've gone into the notary's office and created a company. Entrepreneur is an attitude towards life. And the way I summarize that attitude is that your ideas are bigger than your current resources. The only way you get more resources than you have is through communication. That communication may not need to be verbal. For me, one of my mentors, the reason that I teach today in IESE Business School, is Professor Brian Leggett. And without him, I wouldn't have the opportunity to teach that I do today in IESE Business School. I remember after knowing him for 10, 12 years, he turned 70 and he went from full professor to emeritus professor. And I went up to visit him the week that this was happening in his office up in the top of the A building in IESE. And I came into the room and he was sort of pensive. And he looked up and he said, "Conor, I've been studying leadership for 50 years. I've written books, I've written cases, I've interviewed. It comes down to this. Leadership is vision plus bullying. If you're just a bully with no vision, you're a bully. If you have a vision, but you're not a bully, you're an idealist and nothing happens. The only way you're a leader is the combination. There's a vision of a way the world could be, and you're bashing heads together to push people to get to a place that they wouldn't get without you sharing the vision, but then breaking some things to get people there." I've reflected a lot. He said that to me it's probably 10 years ago now. And when he said it at first, I was thinking, there's more to it than that. The more I think deep down, you've got to have those two capacities. And as you say, persuasion, and I like your definition of it. Persuasion is the conflict-free way of getting what you want. But persuasion is never going to be enough. A leader is a person who takes decisions that piss people off. Now, if you piss off everybody, that's not leadership. But you've got to piss off some people each day in the pursuit of something. Because if no one is pissed off, you've not really taken a decision. If no one feels that they didn't get as much resources as someone else, you're not leading. You're trying to be liked by everyone. And leadership is not an attempt to be liked by everyone. I think deep down, a leader needs a vision. And I guess, for a leader to be authentic, it's that something happened between 5 and 15 years old, that deep down, their vision is that no one else suffers what they suffered. No one else has that lack that they would lack, and that their vision in some way could give back to people that. And some people had very unsafe emotional childhoods. They didn't feel a strong bond of love and trust with their parents. They felt that love was conditional, and they've lived a whole life feeling that love is conditional, trust is conditional, everything's conditional. And what they aspire to is tyranny, a world where there's a father figure that just makes everything safe. So, why are we seeing so many populist, almost dictators being elected today? Is because so many people lived young lives where they didn't feel safe. And safe is not physical. It's an emotional sense of safety, that I am worthy. I'm not worthy because I'm a good student. I'm not worthy because I got good grades. I'm not worthy because I play well at football. I'm not worthy because you're proud of me. I'm worthy because, full stop, I'm life. And life is worthy just to perceive the world, just to be conscious, to just the awareness. And I do worry that this is getting worse and worse. On the sense of story, every culture has a story, every nation has a story. And that story tends to convey what it is to be a good or a bad citizen. And one of the stories that it's not true, but it's got story truth in it. And sometimes I talk about poetic truth, that there's sometimes a truth that can only be captured in story. It's not scientific truth, but it's a truth that everyone who listens to it gets it. And one of the ways I talk about cultures, if you go back 10,000 years and look at the main food supply of each culture, you can understand the culture today. So you go back 10,000 years ago to China, the main food source was rice. What do you need to produce rice? You need the entire village working 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, bent over double, working, hands in the water, planting, preparing. And if the whole village is out 7 days a week, 14 hours a day, every year you will have a good crop and feed the population. But if half the village decides, I'm not interested in this, I want to go find my purpose, the whole village will die. So in China, you don't get to decide whether you do this or not. My survival and our survival as a village depends on everyone getting involved. In China, it's not that individual freedom isn't ignored. It's that you put at risk my survival by you heading off when you're 20 to try and find out who you are in the world. So, the one-child policy for us in the West is hard to imagine that the government or the society or the village elders would have a right to intervene in my home life. In China, for 10,000 years, if the elders didn't intervene in your life, the elders put at risk the continuity of the village.
The opposite of the example you're giving is the one we are seeing more and more now with very detrimental effects in places like the US. The US foundation story is one of freedom, is freeing yourself from the oppressor, and they hold that very dear, even when it makes no sense at all. So I sometimes I sometimes play a bit loose in social media, but I've posted over the last few weeks the real history of the anti-vax movement. So it's very interesting. It goes back way further than we think. But it's one of those cases where, one, there's a combination of a convincing story that is just not true about what is and how what the dangers are, but also it's bumping up against the things we need to do now, where we're still going through COVID in October 2020. But it's bumping up against their foundational story. Everything that suggests that we need you to have less freedom to fight this, they just react against that, even though it makes no logical sense what the arguments are, but that's the problem. It's
I don't think it's freedom that is the big issue we're coming up against in the US. I think the US has had 30 or 40 years where what politicians talk about are your rights. And every community has rights. Americans have rights, and Black Americans have rights, and Indian Americans have rights. Rights are a wonderful thing, but rights never come without obligation. In Rome, if you go back to Athens, there were 6,000 citizens in Athens because there were massive obligations to be a citizen. And there were many citizens that chose to be a slave because it was a lot easier life than living up to the obligations that it required to be a citizen of the Greek state of Athens. And to be a citizen wasn't just you were born in Athens. There were a whole set of things that if you didn't do each year, you could potentially lose your right to be a citizen. Today, the right to be a citizen in many countries is you didn't do anything. You've never contributed. Israel, to be a citizen, you do 4 or 5 years of military service.
South Korea as well, I think.
South Korea.
North Korea, probably.
And a lot of nations, and I'm not saying that military service is the way a nation should allow citizens to see that there's obligations that come along with your rights. But, America, on the one hand, it's freedom far and above almost any other society as a value. Although there's two flavors of freedom. And I think Dan Sullivan most articulately distinguishes there's freedom from and freedom to. Freedom from is to take away my burdens. Freedom to is for what? And that the most damaging approach to retirement is seeing retirement as freedom from a boss, freedom from having to get up, freedom from work, freedom from having to do projects that I don't choose, versus freedom to. It's, I have a list of adventures and projects and people I want to help and communities that I want to go in and make a difference to. That, the way to die quickly is see retirement as freedom from. The way to live a long and meaningful life is see retirement as an opportunity to have freedom to make a difference in the things that you've always wanted to make a difference. And that involves obligation. If you want to help a child, showing up once doesn't help anyone. Showing up week after week after week, when it's easy, when it's hard, when it's cold, when it's sunny, that's what makes a difference in people's life. So, America has had an erosion of the obligations of what it means to be a citizen of the United States. I was listening to a short bit, I guess, in the mornings here. I've watched the presidential debate, the vice presidential debate. Yesterday, I was watching the nomination hearing of
Coney Barrett,
Coney Barrett for the Supreme Court. And there was a very interesting distinction in law. And the first, I found her so concise and clear. It was amazing. She's being attacked and attacked and attacked. And the clarity of her thinking and staying calm under this pressure and being absolutely aware of where her competence ends, where her personal life doesn't play a role and where it can play a role. But there was a distinction between rights. And one of the questions from a Democratic senator was about a case where she had gone against the right to vote of a felon. And then another case where she had supported the right to bear arms of a felon. And the Democrat was saying, so you hold the right to bear arms above the right to vote. And her answer was wonderful in that it just very much clarified how the Constitution approaches these two. The right to vote is a citizenship right. It is part of your engagement in civil society. as an individual living out in, if you're not part of society and you make an effort to not be part of society, in some way you do lose this right, because it's a civic right. The right to bear arms in the Constitution, the right to protect yourself, is an individual right. This is unassailable. This is not because of your participation in community. This is because you're a human being. And that the Constitution distinguishes these two types of right.
Although the Constitution distinguishes it in one of the most confusing lines of the whole Constitution, and one that only got interpreted that way in the last, 20 or 30 years, when coincidentally the Black Panthers seemed to think that they had the right to bear arms, and then all of a sudden everybody had the right to bear arms. I think the line is the right to bear arms in a well-managed militia shall not be infringed upon. And they just seem to forget the well-managed or, well-designed militia or whatever it is. She was unflappable in that first day. Like, she was sticking to her guns that I'm not going to give an opinion. I'm not going to I'm not going to talk about hypotheticals. When I get there, I'll do what the law says I should do. But then she said, I'm going to approach this question with an open wine. People said, sorry, what? Sorry, with an open mind. I mean, with an open mind. It's like, what? Some questions I think can only be approached with an open mind.
Absolutely. No, I'd say she probably knew getting into this was going to be one of the hardest weeks of her life, of just being attacked and attacked and attacked. And all they need is a minute of her getting emotional or angry or them touching on a button. But I think coming back to story, the American story is, your productivity leads to your success or failure. If you're rich, it's entirely down to you. If you're poor, it's entirely down to you. And there was a time when the US had massive opportunity for people who didn't have resources to move their way up in society. That is not the case today. You can see the statistics of, who gains access to the colleges. That they're not people without resources. They're people with resources in terms of money, in terms of good education, in terms of mentors, in terms of family connections who move, who pick up the phone and bully to get them in. But yet the story hasn't changed. So in Europe, what it feels like if you're poor is, Europe doesn't yet have the story of you are entirely the owner of your net worth today. Europe is much, much more, if your father was a carpenter, it's highly likely you're a carpenter. If your father was a real estate owner, it's highly likely you are. If your father was poor, he wasn't a failure or success. And if you happen to be poor, you're not a failure or success. So, to be poor and unemployed in Europe is painful, but it doesn't so get to your core self-esteem as
it's not a judgment. It's not a judgment on you.
Yeah, it's the circumstances in Europe. It's you in the United States. So the opiate crisis in the United States. In Europe, I can be poor and unemployed, and there's plenty of people who want to talk to me. There's whole cultures that sing about it and want to listen to hardships. In America, no one wants to hear your story of how tough it is. No one celebrates the story of how tough it is.
Only when you're on the other side of it.
Only when you're on the other side. So rags to riches is a great story. Rags to rags, shut up. We don't want to hear your story. And yet, I think Jim Rohn has often said, the most powerful learning you could have is get a room full of people who have failed. And I guess failure is always going to be a matter of judgment. But I guess, the ultimate failure is not external failure, it's inner failure. And that inner failure is, which story did you first attach to about what a good human life is? And where did it come from? And how much choice did you have over letting that story in? And I lived enough in the United States from 14, 15, 16 that the story that got into me, that drives my anxiety, is very much that idea of America, that I am responsible for my success or my failure. If I'm struggling financially, it's because I am a failure. If my business fails, it's because I am a failure. And for the last, pretty much since 2008, a lot of the work I do on myself is becoming hyper aware of that little story running inside my head, that saboteur that came from spending 2 years in high school in the US, where we were given this thing instilled into us that you can be anything. All you have to do is choose. And I don't believe that that's necessarily the case. I do think there are a tremendous amount of circumstances that shape where we get to. As a mountain climber, successful mountain climbing, they say an alpinist, which is the highest level of European mountain climbing. An alpinist is only an alpinist if he could be 10 meters from the summit and he turns back because the weather doesn't allow the summit today. And I think, he would come back and be, did you reach the summit? No. Oh, you failed. But the alpinist knew that success was knowing that today was not the day, and they would put in risk their life or the life of others on the mountain if they tried to make the summit today. And I guess we've come to a world that we pay too much attention to the external metric. Did you climb to the very top? And not enough to the inner metric. Did you take the right decision for you, for the team, for the people around you, given the circumstances?
And I think there's something else that sort of circles this whole conversation back to where we started, where you were describing how a lot of people play with their children. And, you touched on Buddhism at some point. And this is, it's very rare that you can notice that more than when you are with a child. Now, I'm not one of those grown-ups that always liked playing with children. And I will tell you that I don't like it. But when I do like it, is because I'm in the moment. It's because, we're playing doctor or just cutting my hair. I mean, quote unquote, cutting my hair. And I'm not actually thinking about, I have this work thing to do. I have there's no results involved. There is nothing I need to do other than just be there. And that's when playing with my daughter becomes very, very enjoyable. And I think with the alpinist example, you don't climb mountains and you don't run marathons, or you shouldn't at least, because that very last moment when you get there is the only moment of pleasure or realization or whatever. And if it is, you're doing it wrong. And you also talked about retirement. And I think that as much as you might be fighting, the doubting Conor in your head about what success is and what failure is, but clearly, I think you've internalized to some degree what it's not, because, and again, I don't normally like to make my guests repeat things that I've heard them say somewhere else, but this to me was such a beautiful definition of success that ties so well with the main subject we talked about today. And I hope you remember it, but what have you described as success?
The success is a judgment. It's not a thing. It's not something that's in the world. Dogs don't see success and failure. Dog doesn't look at you when you come home and think, oh, you failed today. A dog is, you are. Success and failure is a story, and it only exists in our conscious mind. It doesn't exist out of us. Werner Eckhart of the Landmark Forum would say language is where all these problems begin. Without language, problems don't exist. Without language, stories don't exist. Without language, what happened is the only thing that exists. What's happening right now is the only thing that exists. It's our languaging about the world that has become more of how we perceive the world than what actually happens. But success, when I was young, my grandfather told me when I was 14 years old, before the move to the US, my grandfather said, success is earning more than your father. And I bet that's something he heard from someone else. It resonated. He didn't think for a moment what it meant, and he said it. And to my young 13, 14-year-old mind, it was, oh, thanks, Grandpa. I've got the answer. Age 21, I started work at a company called Accenture. And when I walked through the doors in London, my father was the global president worldwide of Arthur Andersen and Accenture.
No pressure.
And I remember one of the very first days, one of the partners in the business came in and sort of talked about his career, his life, motivational. And the key motivational thing was he held up this graph, which was, the salary you can expect over years. And it was this hockey stick. And everyone else was sat in the room looking at where they were and how it moves up. I was looking at the end of the graph thinking, I don't think I've appreciated quite what my dad must be earning. Then I came to Barcelona to do MBA. And I came to Barcelona not speaking the language, and I came here for a girl. It was not a career decision. And in a way, that was a freeing thing, because I'm not going to get a good job in Barcelona. I'm not going to get the job that I could work at in an English-speaking land here with the limited Spanish that I have. And I also, when I first was in Barcelona, age 28, 29, I remember thinking, if I work for Accenture here, first, I'm going to work on all the crappy projects that no one else wants to do for the first few years. And then once I get promoted, I'm going to get sent to Switzerland or London. The same if I work for Sony or HP, 2 promotions and you're being asked to go somewhere else. I thought the only way that I get to control my destination is that I start the business. And actually, when I started, I remember when I started at Accenture, one of my friends from university, their summer job, they were on a Greek beach. And during the day, they would take photos. They would then develop the photos, and then they'd go around the restaurant selling to the people the photos that they'd taken. And he needed to sell 8 photos a day to make more money than I was making working 14 hours a day in Accenture in a suit in London. So my thought when I was looking at being an entrepreneur was, could I sell 8 photos per day? And I think I could do that. And it wasn't going to be photos I was selling. My first business was an insurance brokerage. And again, I just thought, all I need to do is sell 1 policy every day or 2. And if I can keep up that routine for the next 5 years, this company's going to be worth a lot of money. And my definition of success became, I want to have 30 million euros in the bank when I'm 42 years old. And every decision I took from 29 on was pretty much aligned to that. I would sacrifice anything and anyone and any relationship in the pursuit of accumulating wealth. And my sense was, once I've got the wealth, I'll have time for my daughter. Once I've got the wealth, I'll have time to play golf with my friends, play tennis, but I've got to get the wealth first. IESE, when they first asked if I would be willing to teach, I remember thinking, teaching doesn't get me quickly to 30 million in the bank. And I said no. And it took a couple of things happening for me to realize, actually, I never want to retire, because my idea of retirement was very much freedom from, not freedom to. I had no idea what was going to happen if I did magically have 30 million in the bank, age 42. The whole idea was all the pain goes away, but I had no idea what I would use the rest of my life for. And 2008, I had a business. I had an offer on the table for 10 million euros, which I said no. And then Lehman Brothers wiped it out. And I spent 2009 regretting every single day, 1,000 times a day, that I didn't sell the business, that I hadn't signed that sale. And at the end of 2009, I kind of had a big transformation in me of what success is. And it truly was letting go of external measures of success and realizing I can't control how much money is in my bank account. I can't control how much my dad earns. I can't control how people react to me. So if I am to have a definition of success, it needs to be something that I completely have the opportunity to influence, and that success is a wonderful thing, not just for me, but for others. The speaker 2 years ago at the Vistage Global Leadership event was a poet called Cleo Wade, a wonderful woman. And I think when she stood up in front of 1,000 senior leaders, she'd be 22, 23 years old. And she spoke with such clarity, such confidence, such conviction. Her last sentence was, I hope that your dreams will not just change you, but will change the world. And I love this idea. Will your dreams change you or change the world? And probably, back in 2008, my dreams, 30 million in the bank, that would change my life. I didn't think about anyone else. I wanted a house in the countryside. That was for me, not for anyone else. I wasn't thinking about what life my kids would have if we had that. I was thinking about me. So all of my dreams would just change me. They wouldn't make a blind bit of difference, except collateral or accidental, to anyone else. And that idea from Cleo Wade, that I hope you have dreams that won't just change you, but it will really change the world. The people you care about, the people you can influence, have dreams that change them. One of my mentors, Warren Rustand, when I looked at his bucket list of 100 things to do, they were all things that change other people. One of his goals is to give $100 tip. He does it regularly. It's not about him. It's about doing something that really makes someone else's life different. If you imagine, if I've had really good service and get on with a waiter, my tip is probably 18% instead of 17%. What a better attitude to the world to give $100 tip, and not to give it begrudgingly. Actually set a goal that every month I'm going to give $100 tip to someone, and I'm just waiting for someone to be magnificent so that I can do it and have them amazed by what happened. So I remember looking at Warren Rustand, who's 75 years old. All of his goals were about other people. There was not how much money he wanted, what he wanted to achieve, what he wanted to do. It was all about the impact that he wants to have on others. And the version of success that I have today and try to live to is success is to have stories your grandkids want to hear.
Which is perhaps a lofty goal, given children's attention spans and developing interest these days. But as purpose goals, I can hardly think of a better one to have. And
I would say I don't know how lofty it is. I think it's quite a low bar. If this changes how you feel about yourself every single moment of your waking life, why would you put a massive high bar on feeling good? I think having high aspirations outside is very important, but being very generous with yourself, which doesn't mean being lazy. It means forgiving regularly, being compassionate, understanding who you are, but holding yourself to goals. But the moment you don't make it, completely loving yourself. As someone said, love is a generous interpretation of the actions of another. In a relationship, if there's no love and you arrive late, the interpretation is you did it to me. You don't care. You don't respect me. Where there's love, are you okay? Was the traffic bad? Do you need to catch up on something? Are you okay? Love makes such a difference in a relationship. And I think with ourselves, if I can only feel good about myself if I have hundreds of millions and I'm totally safe and my pension is guaranteed and my job is guaranteed and I feel that everyone loves me, well, you're going to have a real shitty experience of life.
Yeah, my idea about saying this is a lofty goal or a high bar is not because of our self-love. Is about having the grandchildren actually sit down, put away the phone and the iPad, turn off the bloody Frozen music, and actually listen to Grandpa. I think that's.
And I think here in practice, you need to leave the iPads on. You need to leave Frozen on, because if you can't compete with them, you're not a good storyteller. And I think an iPad and an iPhone, these are not enemies. These are wonderful teaching tools for us. If your conversation is worse than a TikTok, then you need to improve the quality of your conversation with your kids.
I think this is a slogan that most speaking trainers or communication trainers should have: is become more interesting than TikTok.
Yeah, become better than an iPhone. And I guess as a finish, there's a definition of success from Pema Chodron, and Pema Chodron is an American housewife who became a Buddhist monk, and her story is just again, normal is a dangerous word, but a struggling American housewife, struggling with her family, struggling to make her way in the world, and I think in her 50s. Her husband left, her kids were fed up with her, and everything fell apart. And she had to remake herself. And it's been a struggle. And in her books, it's not the sort of Buddhist who's always had it together. It's a Buddhist who's struggling with living life. But her definition of success is that tonight, while you lie in your bed, about to fall asleep with your eyes closed, you reflect on today. And you look through the events of the day, and you find one moment where you were about to react and you didn't react. Today is a success. And she said, now tonight, if you were there in bed and you close your eyes and you look through the day and you don't find a single moment where you didn't react, today is still a success because you're aware. And it's possible that tomorrow could be better. Too many of us have inner goals that are far too difficult, are far too punishing, are almost the Sisyphean task of, even if you make it, it's going to kill you for the next day. And I've been working very hard on having inner goals so small, so achievable, so minute and easy to achieve that doesn't take a lot of activity to feel good about yourself. And I think even that is too much. I think we as human beings have a right to feel good about ourselves for existing, not because we're good, not because we contribute. And it's a sabotage story within ourselves, feeling that if only this, I would feel better. It's you get to feel good and you get to do the things that serve others. But the idea that I need to feel guilty so that I do serve others, that's transactional goodness. I wake up and I get to feel good about myself, and I get to take actions that serve others, that are acts of love, acts of unconditional giving of something of value to me that makes a tangible difference to the people around me. And I don't do it because of anything. I do it because that's what life fundamentally is, that the choice to be able to be that.
And I don't know if this is perhaps the lofty goal, is to enjoy rolling that rock up a hill and enjoying that struggle and getting our minds out of this idea that I'm going to do this and then the payment comes, then life becomes good, then that is what life is about, or success, or whatever we're going to call these things. And perhaps it's idealized, but as we talked about this in many different ways today, but a lot of people live their lives as if they're rolling that rock up a hill, and at some point they're going to get out of that. But the Sisyphean struggle is life. Life is the struggle. And if you learn to see it that way, then you're living in one of those moments that makes for a story worth telling. If not, you're waiting for life to start, and sometimes it doesn't.
And I think actually life is worse. Sisyphus stays the same age, the same strength, the same health. He doesn't get sick. In life, you're pushing the rock up the hill and you're going to get sicker and sicker. And today is the healthiest moment the rest of your life. And Nietzsche viewed being born as a curse. And the reason we need meaning is if you looked at it, it's like we're here to suffer. But if that suffering has no purpose, it's just pure suffering. If the suffering in some way in your mind, you can make it purposeful, then that's what life becomes. And I think Viktor Frankl has a wonderful quote, which I'm not going to even attempt to bastardize now, but the idea is human being is different from all others. It's not that we find purpose. We choose purpose. And, we choose to do the things that we do. So Sisyphus gets to push the ball up because he's made to, or he can make a choice. And I think this concept on choice, a choice is where I take responsibility for my life. And very often this is taken poorly by those that wish to, am I responsible for my hunger? Well, technically, no. But until I take responsibility for where I am and everything about my life, I am powerless to actually affect change. The moment I take responsibility, that everything I have and every bit of me and every skill I have is entirely my responsibility. It's not my fault, but it is entirely my responsibility. And I choose to take that responsibility and choose to take it upon me and me, the essence of me. That's when you become powerful and resourceful and creative. And this idea that possibility opens up.
I think I might have heard a wise Irishman who lives in Barcelona say that it might not be your fault, but it's still your problem.
This was one of the cruelest sentences my father would often use. I think there's two sentences I just remember driving me mad as a kid from my father. And one was, it may be their fault, but it's your problem, which was his constant thing whenever I complained about the teacher not doing or my friend not doing or this not contributing. It may be their fault, but it's your problem. And that is this idea of take ownership.
It's one of the most empowering ideas you can have. It's your problem, what you're going to do about it. Because if you're not going to do anything about it and you can't do anything about it, then it's just this, Damocles sword over your head. Just make it my problem. Now I can interact with it. Now I can do something about it. But I can imagine how a kid, particularly a teenager, would hate that.
Hated it. His second thing was, there are no they.
Another good one.
And again, once you'd taken responsibility for the problem, it was well, they need to do this, or they should do that, or they need to let me, or they should give me resources. And he would just say, "There are no they. There are no they. There are no they."
Yeah, a lesson perhaps a lot of the world needs to remember, or be taught or be reminded of. Conor, I'm very aware of of your time. We've gone past the I think 45 minutes or an hour that we said we're going to do by 8 miles. So we did touch on your very popular YouTube channel. Is that the best place for someone to go find you if they want to find out more about your work?
So until Conor McGregor became the worldwide phenomenon in ultimate fighting that he was, I used to be able to say, just stick the word Conor in Google and I'll pop up. Today, if you put Conor in Google, I don't think I even made it to the front page. I need a surname. So if you stick Conor, you get Conor McGregor. You put Conor Neill in Google, you'll find my blog, my page at IESE Business School. But to me, my blog, which is conorneill.com, is where my writing, my articles, the questions I ask myself, the videos that I share.
So conorneill.com, I'm going to list that on the show notes. And once again, thank you very much for your time, mate. And unfortunately, we used to bump into each other at birthdays and celebrations, which this year have been harder to come by. But let's hope that as next year comes and those celebrations roll around again, we can actually meet up in person, or even one of these days at IESE, which now I've joined the never-ending team of coaches and trainers there on the communications course.
Excellent.
So, and thank you very much for your time. This was great.
Francisco, have a good one.
All right, everyone. Thanks for tuning in. Take care of yourselves, and until next time. I hope you enjoyed the show. And if you did, I'd love for you to subscribe and leave us a review or a rating on the Apple Podcasts app. It's very easy. You open the app and find this show. Then scroll down a little, and when you see the stars, tap. I'd really appreciate it, and it does help other people find us. And if you'd like to get in touch or find out more about what I do, reach out to me on LinkedIn or visit my website, storypowers.com.